All right, so this is step 3 in the oil painting tutorial about painting an ocean at sunset. And I love to start with darker middle value colors to fill in those shapes that we talked about in the last video. Why is that? Let's get to that right now. Okay, so once I get some of the major elements in place and have a pretty good idea of where I want to go with it, then I fill those large shapes with middle value colors. Now, why middle value rather than lighter value? So middle value colors, the thing about them is, and when I'm talking about middle value, let's say we're talking about a value scale from 1 to 10 or 1 to 9. Let's say 1 to 9. And 1 is the brightest and 9 is the darkest of the values. 1 to 2 are the really bright, and 8 and 9 are the really dark values in our scale. So from 3 to 7, those are really the middle value colors. You could go 4 to 6, something like that, but 3 to 7 is what I generally consider the middle value areas. They're not the brightest, they're not the darkest, they're in the middle. And I like to have a big range in that middle. The thing about the brightest, when you start getting really bright, it means basically we're either taking something like cad lemon straight from the tube. That's about as bright as we can get when it comes to a paint color. Cad lemon straight from the tube. We start adding white to it, and then white. White is obviously the lightest valued pigment that we have to use. But white is not a color. It's absent of all color. It reflects all color away from it. Black is also absent of color. It absorbs all color into it. So there is no color in white or black. It's those in-betweens. It's those middle value colors that really contain all the saturated color that makes life so vibrant and beautiful. I like to keep as much as I can within a painting in those middle value ranges as long as possible, because when I start getting into the light value ranges, then I'm using usually more white. And white, when you add it to a color, it desaturates it, which means it's taking away some of that brilliant color that it naturally possesses. Like let's say you take cad red straight from the tube, how brilliant it looks, how red and juicy and vibrant it is. Well, you start adding white into that, and now it's desaturating. It's taking away that brilliance of color, and it starts to become a much weaker looking color than it was originally. And there are two reasons for that. The white not only desaturates it, but it also cools the color temperature of it. And the combination of those two will weaken, comparatively speaking, will weaken that color. Now, there are some colors like ultramarine blue that they come out of the tube so dark that it's hard to even tell what color they really are. We can see little hints of it, like cooler or warmer in some of the color temperature of it, but to see the actual color is really difficult just because the value is so dark. And that's the difficulty we have when we're dealing with the really dark range of colors as well, is we really can't see what color we're working with. There's no real color either in the brightest range or the darkest range of colors. When we get into that middle area, that's when we start to get into the real color, the meat of the color. So I like to stick within those middle value ranges. And in the early stages of the painting, I like to stay as much as possible with paint straight from the tube and on that darker range of the middle value area. So we're talking the 5, 6, 7 of the middle value colors. And with that, it means that as I'm developing the painting, then I can get much stronger color than I would if I was starting with the bright ones. Because when we start getting into the brighter range, the 2, 3, 4, we're getting close to that area where we're adding more and more white to it. And if we're adding more and more white, we're losing color, we're losing brilliance, we're losing saturation. So if we stay on the darker side of those for as long as possible. Now it really depends. Sometimes people like to work in a high key. So high key just means bright. The more high key, the brighter it is. It's on the bright end of the value spectrum. Low key means it's on the dark end of the value spectrum. That's all it is. It sounds Sometimes it's confusing when you hear these terms, but there's really not a lot to them. It's just knowing what they are is all it is. For me, I like to have a big range of values in there. I like to have a lot of contrast. I like punches where I have a dark accent or a bright highlight. So that's the way that I work when I'm thinking about most of my paintings. So in this case, I get back to the painting. When I talk about coming in here with the MiddleValue colors, once I have those established, see here I'm coming in with phthalo blue and some transparent oxide yellow. With these colors right here, I'm laying them in dark like that because then anything I build on top of that, especially a bright one, it's really going to stand out. This gives me much more opportunity to build on top of than if I started with bright colors. So I added a little bit of white. I'm coming in and putting in, as you can see in the reference photo, those shadows that are in the hills. I'm just coming in and putting in a semblance of those shadows. And this is just quick. I'm not trying to be super exact with it. It's just eyeballing it because I know that I can modify them. I can change them later on in the painting. But this is just to give me an idea of it. So I did add a little bit of white to that if you noticed, but it's really not a lot of white. It's just a little bit so that I start to change the value a bit, especially as it goes into the distance. But really what I'm going for right now is more of a moody effect. And I do struggle later on in the painting with knowing if I want to change, if I want to start adding in more detail and lose that moody effect or not. Because at one point I really like the look of this, but I decided to keep progressing with it. Just getting in the overall big color shapes, filling in all the spaces. But you notice I'm using a real dry brush type of technique. And dry brush just means I don't have a lot of opaque paint on my brush. And that way the bristles can separate and you can see the undercolor, that first tone of color I put on there, you can see that coming through those bristle strokes. Because I don't want to get rid of all of that first tone of color. I want, even in the very end of the painting, some of that color to come through. It kind of creates a harmonious unifier throughout the painting, and it just gives some punches to the painting here and there. Punches of color. I love that warm color that comes through there. Now sometimes it gets eliminated completely, but oftentimes by the end of the painting there's still little remnants of that showing through. Now often those colors are gone because I put so much opaque paint all over that it completely gets rid of the background. But for the most part, I will generally have little remnants of that initial washed in color showing through in the final version of the painting. And those little bits of color act as unifiers throughout the painting to kind of tie all the elements together to help each part feel like it's part of the same environment, the same atmosphere, the same lighting, and that all those elements combine into one cohesive whole. At least that's the goal. That's what I'm hoping for with it.